It was supposed to be just another quiet night. Most people think the dead of night is calm, serene, peaceful, but that's only true if you're not alone. If you're not walking corridors that echo with whispers no one else can hear. I learned this the hard way on my very first night working as a night custodian at an old middle school, the kind of building where the floors creak like they're warning you to leave, where the fluorescent lights buzz overhead as if tired of illuminating the same dark hallways every night. I clocked in at 10 as usual, expecting a calm shift, a routine sweep of classrooms, empty trash, mop up the corridors, lock the doors, repeat. At first, the silence was comforting. No kids running down hallways, no teachers complaining, no chaos, just me and the smell of cleaning supplies, the faint scent of chalk dust lingering from the day. It should have been fine, but old buildings like that carry memories even if you can't see them. On my first night, I passed the basement door and felt an odd chill ripple up my spine. I remember laughing to myself, thinking it was just nerves, the kind you feel when you're in an empty place alone at night. The basement was never a place anyone wanted to be. Damp, cold, with concrete walls that seemed to trap sound. It felt alive in a way that wasn't right. Pipes knocked. Lockers popped open in the silence. Shadows moved where none should have existed. And, as any custodian quickly learns, the basement is where the impossible quietly settles in, waiting for you to notice it. 2 years into the job, I finally had a task that I couldn't avoid, bringing a stack of folding chairs up for an event. The only place they were kept was the basement. I stood at the top of the stairwell door for a long moment, debating whether to call it off, asking myself if it could wait until morning. Pride won over caution, as it often does when you're trying not to look lazy. So I grabbed my flashlight and pushed open the heavy door. The stairwell echoed with every step. By the time I reached the bottom, only a few of the flickering overhead lights had turned on, leaving half the hallway in darkness. The smell of wet cement mixed with dust hit me instantly, sharp and tangible. I moved down the hall, flashlight cutting a narrow path of clarity in the thick shadows. The first storage room was full of old desks, piled impossibly high. The second, where the chairs were, had a rusted door that squealed as I opened it, the sound scraping across the silent basement like fingernails on a chalkboard. I bent to grab as many chairs as I could carry, thinking about nothing more than the weight of the metal in my arms. But then, from somewhere deeper in the hallway, I heard it. A slow, deliberate dragging sound, like someone was sliding their shoes across the floor. My breath caught, and I froze, clutching the chairs tightly, straining to see into the darkness. The beam of my flashlight revealed nothing, yet the sensation of being watched was immediate, pressing against my skin in the cold, damp air. I told myself it was just the building pipes, settling, rats, but my gut knew otherwise. I carried the first load of chairs up toward the stairs, every nerve on edge, the cold draft brushing my face like fingers. The basement was supposed to be warm, stale, trapped, yet this sudden wind, this chill, was impossible. I left the chairs and returned for more, and each time I glanced down the long hallway, the shadows seemed to move just out of the reach of the light. When I came back for the last load, the chairs in the room looked different somehow, shifted subtly, leaning at angles they hadn't been before. My heart hammered. I refused to acknowledge the possibility, telling myself I was imagining things, but even as I rationalized, I could hear it again, the slow, dragging shuffle, this time unmistakably behind me in the corridor. I spun, flashlight cutting through the darkness, and for a brief, impossible second, I thought I saw a figure standing at the far end of the hall. Just a shadow, not fully formed, and when I blinked, it was gone. My skin prickled. I abandoned the chairs completely, keeping the flashlight aimed down the hall, inching my way toward the stairwell. Every creak of the floor sounded amplified. Every dripping pipe seemed like deliberate percussion in a symphony designed to unnerve me. I reached the stairs and bolted up, my hands trembling, my mind racing with excuses I didn't believe. That night, I didn't return to the basement. A week later, I was mopping the hallway above the stairwell when it happened again. 3 loud bangs, spaced evenly, like fists pounding the wall from inside. My mop slipped, water spilling onto the tiles. I froze, listening. The basement door rattled violently, as if something inside was trying to escape. My blood ran cold. I didn't open it. I didn't even breathe, pressed against the wall until the sound stopped. After that, I never went down alone again. Even when colleagues were present, I avoided the basement. No one ever laughed or joked when I refused to return. They all knew, some instinctively, that the basement of that school wasn't just damp and cold. It was alive with something that didn't belong to the world we walked in every day. Weeks passed, months passed. I transferred schools eventually, leaving behind the basement, the night shifts, the whispers, but the memory never left. Even today, when I close my eyes, I can hear the dragging of shoes behind me, feel that cold pressure on my back, smell the damp cement and musty wood. It's a memory that doesn't fade, a reminder that some places never forgive the living for wandering alone in the dark. The second story begins not in a basement, but in a place that seems safe to everyone who passes through it during the day, a high school auditorium. It was enormous, with 3 levels of seating, a massive stage, and heavy curtains that hung like dark, silent sentinels. During the day, it looked like a normal space, alive with laughter, footsteps, and music. But at night, empty and quiet, it became a different world entirely. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the seats, echoing footsteps sounded like they were coming from nowhere, and the air itself seemed heavier, almost watching. I had worked as a night custodian at this school for 2 years, usually covering shifts alone, sweeping, mopping, emptying trash, and turning off lights. The auditorium was always last on the list, a place I saved for the end because I didn't want to go inside any sooner. There was something about it that made the hair on the back of my neck rise even in daylight, but at night it was unbearable. The acoustics, the emptiness, the sheer size of the room, it wasn't just intimidating. It was alive and it waited. One winter night I arrived around midnight. A play was scheduled for the morning, so the stage had to be spotless. I wheeled in my cart, the wheels creaking softly, and started sweeping the aisles. The metallic scraping of chairs echoed down the cavernous space, each sound multiplying, bouncing back from the walls and ceiling in an unnatural rhythm. I told myself it was nothing. Buildings like this make sounds at night. That's normal, right? But then I heard it. A faint rustling from the stage, soft but deliberate, as if someone or something was moving carefully, deliberately. My heartbeat picked up, but I tried to focus, sweeping the rows, ignoring the shadows that seemed to flinch just beyond my flashlight. A few minutes later, I stopped dead. Footsteps, slow and methodical, coming from the stage. I froze, broom in hand, shining the flashlight toward the source. The stage was empty. The props, old chairs, ropes, painted scenery, they hadn't moved an inch. Yet the sound persisted in my ears, unmistakable. My rational mind tried to explain it. A mouse, the building settling, air movement. But none of that accounted for the deliberate rhythm, the pressure in the air, the sense that something unseen was pacing above me. I climbed the steps onto the stage, flashlight sweeping the dust, laden surfaces, the wooden floorboards creaking beneath my weight. Every time I moved the beam, shadows danced across the walls like figures teasing me from the darkness. Then I heard it a whisper, Not the wind, not a creak, but a voice, low, almost melodic, calling my name. My name. It sent an icy jolt straight through me. The whispering repeated, faint at first, then closer, more deliberate, as if the building itself were speaking, taunting, aware of my presence. I spun, flashlight cutting the darkness into slices, but there was nothing. No one, nothing, only the props stacked neatly, frozen in place. I backed away slowly, heart racing, my breath coming in shallow bursts. Every step echoed, amplified by the emptiness of the auditorium. My mind tried to rationalize it, maybe a prank, maybe a co-worker who had forgotten something, but logically, it couldn't be. I was alone. All doors were locked, the stage curtains heavy and unmoving. Yet I felt watched. Every corner, every shadow, every dark recess seemed alive. I finished sweeping the lower level and began mopping. The echo of the mop, combined with the lingering whispers and my racing pulse, created a soundtrack of tension that I couldn't escape. Shadows in the upper tiers shifted just at the edge of my vision, and every time I looked, nothing was there. Yet, the sense of being observed was inescapable. Something was moving above me, pacing, whispering, testing boundaries I didn't even know existed. By the time I approached the stage for the final clean, I felt a presence, not imagined, not rationalized away, a weight in the air, cold and oppressive, pushing against me. I glanced into the balcony, and for a fleeting moment, I saw a silhouette. Just a shadow of a figure, unmoving, staring, and then it was gone, blinked out like it had never existed. I told myself it was a coat on a chair, a trick of the light. Anything but the chill in the room, the unnatural feeling of eyes watching, remained. The whisper came again, now unmistakable. My name, spoken softly yet clearly, directly behind me. I whirled around, the flashlight slipped in my hand, beam quivering, but the stage was empty. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed, and yet I knew I hadn't imagined the voice. I backed toward the side door, chest tight, legs shaking. As I neared the edge of the stage, soft footsteps echoed from the balcony above, slow, deliberate, pacing, as if someone was moving back and forth, watching, waiting. Finally, I bolted through the side door, cold night air slamming against my face, and for the first time in years, felt relief. Yet, even as I locked the door behind me, I knew the echo of those footsteps and the whispered calling of my name would linger in my mind forever. Weeks later, I learned that a drama teacher had died on that stage years earlier. Suddenly, heart attack, during rehearsal. Rumor had it that sometimes the traces of the dead lingered in the spaces where they had been, lingering in the air, manifesting in whispers and footsteps for those unlucky enough to witness it. I never went back alone. Even with colleagues present, the feeling of being watched never left, a constant reminder that some places carry their history like a living thing. There's a lesson in that night, one I didn't understand until later. The safety of daytime illusion doesn't hold against the truth of night. Empty spaces, familiar during the day, transform when you are alone. Shadows grow teeth. Silence becomes a predator, and sometimes the past isn't done with the present, waiting for someone to notice, waiting for someone to hear the whispers that never should have been heard. The third story I'm about to tell takes place in a place you would never suspect could be terrifying. A suburban home, ordinary in every way, with white walls, a cozy living room, and the faint hum of streetlights outside. But appearances are deceiving. The terror didn't come from the supernatural at first glance, and that's what makes it so disturbing. It starts subtly, almost imperceptibly, until the ordinary world shifts and reveals something utterly unexplainable. It was late at night when my friend Sarah called me. She sounded frantic, her voice trembling as if she had been holding back tears for hours. She had just moved into a new house, the kind people dream about when buying a suburban home. Quiet street, small garden, a single story with room for everything. But she told me she couldn't sleep, not because of any sound she could place, not because of an intruder or an obvious danger, but because the house itself felt wrong. I laughed at first. We joked about new house jitters, the kind of anxiety that makes shadows deeper than they should be. But when I arrived that night, what I felt immediately changed my perspective. The moment I stepped through the front door, a weight pressed on my chest. It wasn't visible, but it was there, tangible. The air felt thick, heavy, as if breathing required effort. Sarah's eyes were wide, darting toward every corner, every shadow. She led me to the living room, pointing at nothing. "It's like someone's watching," she whispered. I smiled nervously, trying to dismiss the sensation. Yet, even as I laughed, I noticed a slight movement in the corner of my eye. A shadow that shouldn't have been there, twisting unnaturally in the faint lamplight. We sat on the couch, attempting casual conversation, but every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind outside, made us jump. Then it started, subtle sounds, barely audible at first, like footsteps pacing softly upstairs. Sarah's house only had one floor, but the sound came from above, high and slow, measured. I froze. Probably the floorboards. I suggested, though my own voice betrayed uncertainty. But even as I rationalized, the footsteps grew closer, moving in rhythm, circling, as if mapping our location. I decided to check the house, flashlight in hand, every step echoing unnaturally. The living room was empty. The kitchen, bathroom, bedrooms all normal, untouched, nothing moved, nothing missing. Yet the sound persisted, soft, deliberate, circling, pacing, almost like someone was tracing the lines of our paranoia. The house had no upper floors, yet the sound had a height, a resonance that made the hair on my arms stand on end. Sarah clutched my arm. "It's coming from inside the walls," she whispered. I wanted to laugh, but I couldn't. Something wasn't right. As we sat back down, the atmosphere thickened. I noticed the shadows had started shifting, subtly, creeping along the walls even though the lamps hadn't been moved. And then the first whisper came, low and indistinct. I couldn't understand the words, but it was deliberate, close, almost tasting the air we breathed. Sarah froze, her eyes fixed on the corner of the room. "It's saying something," she said, trembling. "I don't know what, but it's calling me." I stepped closer to the corner, flashlight cutting into the darkness. Nothing. Dust motes floated lazily in the beam, furniture untouched. But then I saw it, a small, dark silhouette, low to the ground, shifting with a fluidity that didn't belong to a human or an animal. It moved against the light, disappearing, reappearing, defying logic. My pulse raced, every rational thought screaming this shouldn't exist. Yet it was there, something inhuman, silent except for the whispers, circling, waiting, watching. Sarah grabbed my arm again. "We need to leave," she said, urgency and fear overriding any attempt at calm. I nodded, agreeing silently, though I wanted to investigate further, to prove it was nothing. But the moment I stood, the temperature dropped sharply. The air itself seemed to thicken, pressing against my chest. I could see my breath. A low, guttural humming began, vibrating through the floor, walls, and ceiling simultaneously. Not sound alone, but a physical presence, almost alive, as if the house itself had become aware of us. We bolted toward the front door, but the shadows seemed to stretch, elongate, subtly shifting to block our path. Every step we took echoed strangely, not matching the distance we moved, amplified and delayed, disorienting. And then the whispers changed, not words, but a sequence of soft, mocking laughs, high, pitched and low, coming from every corner, every direction at once. I could feel their intention. It wasn't just to scare, but to trap, to make us doubt what was real, to twist our senses until nothing felt solid. We managed to reach the door, but even as I turned the knob, the door resisted. Not physically, but almost as if the house was testing our resolve, questioning whether we deserved to leave. I shoved it open, and the cold night air rushed in, relief like a wave crashing over us. We didn't look back. As we sprinted down the street, Sarah whispered, voice shaking, "It follows you sometimes, even outside. At night, you feel it breathing with you." I laughed nervously, trying to assure her it couldn't, but deep down, I felt it too. The lingering weight of that house, the memory of the whispers, the pressure of those unseen eyes tracking every movement. The next day, we returned briefly with others, trying to rationalize, to explore, to find any evidence of a rational explanation. Everything was normal. No shadows, no whispers, no temperature drop. But that night, when alone, Sarah would hear footsteps circling, the soft, low hum, whispers that called her name. And I believe her because I felt it too, a presence that didn't belong to the living, a house that had become aware, and a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying horrors are not in basements, auditoriums, or abandoned places. They are in the most ordinary, familiar spaces, lying in wait, patient and hungry for attention. Even after Sarah's house incident, I couldn't shake the feeling that darkness doesn't need a place to live. It can exist anywhere, anywhere that allows fear to take root. That realization came to me a few weeks later when I visited an old relative's home in a small town. The house had been abandoned for years, dusty, with peeling wallpaper and warped floorboards. Locals whispered about it being cursed, but no one really knew why. I had always been skeptical, convinced it was just superstition, until that night. I arrived just before sunset, keys in hand, stepping cautiously over the threshold. The air inside was cold, stale, and heavy, almost sticky. Sunlight barely pierced the dusty windows, casting strange geometric shadows across the living room floor. It smelled of mold and decay, a scent that clung to your clothes the moment you entered. I unpacked my flashlight, the beam trembling slightly in my hand, and began to explore. Every step made the wooden floorboards groan and creak, echoing unnaturally through the house's empty corridors. The first oddity came almost immediately. I was in the kitchen, wiping dust from the counters, when I noticed the cabinets shifting slightly, doors closing on their own. I stopped, heart pounding, telling myself it was just an uneven floor or the house settling. But then I heard it, a soft scraping sound coming from the hallway, faint at first, like someone dragging a chair across the floor. My rational mind struggled to make sense of it. Who would be there? No one was supposed to be there. The house had been empty for years. I followed the sound cautiously, flashlight cutting through thick shadows, and entered the hallway. The temperature had dropped, my breath visible in the beam of light. At the end of the hallway, I saw a doorway leading into a bedroom. The scraping stopped as I approached, replaced by a low, almost inaudible whisper. It wasn't speaking words I could understand, but it had intent, purpose, like it was communicating something I wasn't meant to hear. I froze, listening. The whispering grew louder, echoing around the room, bouncing off the walls, pressing against my eardrums. Inside the bedroom, the shadows seemed to move independently, curling along the floor and walls in ways that defied physics. My flashlight flickered, as if the darkness itself were trying to consume the light. And then I saw it, a silhouette taller than a man, thin, impossibly still, standing near the far wall. Its head tilted slightly, observing me, unmoving. The hairs on my arms stood on end, my pulse raced. Rational thoughts screamed it couldn't be real, but my senses told me otherwise. Every instinct screamed to leave, yet my feet were rooted to the floor. I whispered Sarah's name, more to ground myself than to call for help. The silhouette didn't move. The room's shadows grew darker, heavier, pressing in closer. The whispering escalated into multiple voices, overlapping, each echoing my name, my thoughts, my fears. I stumbled backward, tripping over debris, falling to the floor. The presence didn't pursue me, but it didn't need to. Its weight was enough to suffocate, enough to make the air itself a weapon. I scrambled to my feet and ran toward the front door. Just as I reached the threshold, the whispering ceased abruptly. The room was silent, still, as if nothing had happened. I slammed the door behind me, gasping for air, chest tight, heart hammering. Outside, the cool night air hit me like a wave, a temporary relief that did little to erase the memory of what I had seen. I knew rational explanations were impossible. There was no one in the house, and yet something had been there, something aware, something that watched and waited. The next day, I returned briefly, hoping to rationalize it with sunlight. Everything was normal. No shadows moved, no whispers echoed. But at night, I knew the house came alive again. People who dismissed it during the day would never believe the suffocating pressure, the shifting shadows, the sense of being observed. And that's the most terrifying thing. When darkness becomes sentient, when it waits, watches, and tests its prey, no logical explanation can save you. I realized that fear thrives on the unexpected. It doesn't need basements, auditoriums, or abandoned houses. It hides in corners you never thought to check, in familiar spaces turned alien by silence, shadows, and the unseen presence of something that shouldn't exist. The mind struggles against it, rationalizes it, but the body knows the truth. Some experiences are beyond explanation. They are felt in the chest, the skin, the trembling hands, the racing heart. They are lived, not imagined. That night, as I lay in bed, the events of the abandoned house and Sarah's experience intertwined in my mind. The whispers, the shadows, the sense of being watched, they followed me into my dreams. I could almost feel the cold pressure of unseen eyes, the air thick and suffocating, the shadows shifting in impossible ways. Fear isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, almost imperceptible, waiting for you to lower your guard. And when you do, it's already inside, breathing with you, watching, learning. I returned to that house a few times during the day, rationalizing, exploring, trying to expose the illusion. But nothing proved or disproved it. The truth only existed in that moment of night, when the world was silent, the air thick, and shadows moved on their own accord. Darkness doesn't announce itself with noise. It creeps, it waits, it envelops you slowly, until every rational thought is drowned by instinctive fear. Eventually, I left the town, leaving the house behind. But even now, I can feel it sometimes not a physical presence, but a memory of it. The way the shadows seemed alive, the whispers crawling under the skin, the chilling sensation that the house was aware. And that's the ultimate horror. Places that seem safe can harbor an intelligence we can neither see nor reason with. Fear doesn't need an explanation. It only needs a moment of stillness, a space to grow, and a mind willing to notice. Even after leaving that abandoned house, the sensation of being watched never truly left me. It lingered in quiet moments, in shadows that seemed to stretch longer than they should, in the subtle creaks and groans of ordinary homes. I realized that horror doesn't always wait in isolated, abandoned spaces. It thrives in the in-between, in the mundane, in moments when your mind relaxes just enough for fear to creep in. That understanding hit me most vividly one rainy night, when I was alone in my own apartment. The rain tapped softly against the window, a steady rhythm that was almost soothing. The room was dimly lit, only the faint glow of a lamp near my desk. I had been working late, engrossed in a book, when I noticed something strange. A shadow flickered at the edge of my vision, small and subtle, but undeniably there. I paused, my pulse quickening, telling myself it was just a trick of the light. But as I looked closer, the shadow shifted unnaturally, not following the rules of physics or the contours of the furniture. My stomach tightened. The quietness of the room suddenly felt oppressive. The familiar surroundings, my personal space, transformed into something alien. Every creak of the building, every drip of water from the ceiling, sounded amplified. And then I heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible whisper, so low it could have been mistaken for the hum of my lamp. But it was deliberate, purposeful, calling my name just under the edge of comprehension. My hands shook as I set the book down, straining to catch the words. It didn't matter how much logic I applied. I knew what I heard. The whispers grew, layering upon themselves, until the room seemed filled with dozens of voices speaking in unison, yet none saying anything I could fully comprehend. I could feel their focus, like invisible eyes boring into me from every direction. I wanted to run, but my feet felt heavy, glued to the floor as if the air itself resisted my movement. The shadows thickened, curling along the walls, wrapping corners, reaching across surfaces in ways that made no sense. They moved with intent, with awareness, and with a patience that made my blood run cold. Suddenly, the room temperature plummeted, my breath forming clouds in front of me. I could feel a presence directly behind me, though nothing was visible. The sensation was suffocating, pressing against my spine, forcing me to lean forward to keep from collapsing. A faint, dragging sound began at my feet, slow and deliberate, circling me. I spun around, flashlight in hand, but the beam caught nothing but empty space. Still, the feeling persisted, an unmistakable awareness, a consciousness that existed without form, observing, waiting. I remembered the other places, the basement of the middle school, the auditorium, Sarah's house, the abandoned home. All shared a similar quality, a presence that didn't need physical form, that manipulated sound, shadow, and perception to unnerve its target. Fear itself became the instrument, bending reality just enough to make the rational mind doubt everything it senses. I realized then that horror is not about seeing monsters. It's about feeling them, knowing they are there, even if they remain unseen. The whispers coalesced into distinct words, slow and deliberate. "You cannot leave," they said, in voices that were my own and yet alien, echoing inside my head. My heart raced, but my mind screamed to act, to flee. I turned toward the door, but it resisted, as if the room itself had solidified around me. The shadows twisted and elongated, merging into a wall of darkness that seemed alive. The dragging sound intensified, coming closer, circling faster, yet never visible. I understood with a bone, deep clarity, that I was not alone and perhaps never would be. I bolted for the window, throwing it open, and the rain poured in, soaking me instantly. The cold air hit like a wall, a temporary reprieve, but the shadows didn't recede. They hovered at the edge of vision, waiting, patient. Even as I climbed out into the storm, the whispers followed, soft and omnipresent, promising that distance could not sever the connection. Fear had attached itself to me, invisible yet persistent, a lingering presence in every darkened corner, every silent room, every quiet night. That night, as I walked through the rain-soaked streets, I realized something terrifyingly simple. Fear does not belong to a place or a time. It belongs to perception, to awareness. It can exist in abandoned basements, empty auditoriums, abandoned homes, and even in the familiar spaces of our lives. It thrives in silence, in isolation, and in the moments when the human mind is most vulnerable. And the most unsettling part is knowing that once it finds a foothold, it never truly leaves. It waits, it watches, it exists in the cracks, ready to return when the mind relaxes, when the shadows stretch, when the night is still. I thought about Sarah, her whispered experiences, and how the ordinary became extraordinary in the presence of fear. I thought about the abandoned house and the invisible, observing force that had trapped me in that hallway. I thought about the middle school basement, the dragging footsteps in the dark, and the auditorium where unseen eyes followed every move. And I realized that the world is full of spaces like these, ordinary by day, terrifying by night. Fear does not need monsters or ghosts. It needs only a moment, a quiet space, and the willingness to notice. Even now, as I recount these stories, I feel it lingering at the edges of my perception. Shadows shift slightly as I move my eyes. The air feels a touch heavier in quiet rooms. A soft whisper brushes against my awareness, subtle enough to be ignored, persistent enough to be remembered. That is the nature of true horror. It is not a spectacle, but a sensation. It is experienced, not observed. It does not need to show itself to be real. And those who have felt it know that once you notice it, it is impossible to forget. These stories, though separated by time and place, share a singular quality. They demonstrate that horror is woven into the fabric of reality, waiting patiently for moments of quiet, isolation, and attention. The middle school basement, the empty auditorium, Sarah's home, and the abandoned house all exemplify this truth. Fear is not bound by walls or floors. It exists in the spaces we inhabit, in our awareness, and in the shadows we ignore. It is patient, intelligent, and inevitable. So when you lie in bed tonight, listen to the subtle creaks of your house, watch the shifting shadows along the walls, feel the slight weight in the air when the room is still. Perhaps you will understand, as I do, that fear is always closer than you think. It does not knock. It does not announce itself. It waits. And when you notice it, when you truly feel it, you will know why these stories are disturbing, not because of what was seen, but because of what was felt, what was known, and what continues to watch, silently, always present, always patient.